Hello. Hi, Tamar.
Hi, Manoj.
Hey, welcome. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll just give a minute or so, as usual, from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining us. And in a minute, we can get started on digital accessibility testing, how to get it right from Tamar. For those of you already joined, let's try to be interactive. Please post your questions in the Q&A section, and on the chat, you could say hi and the place that you're joining from so that we all know which part of the world that you're joining from. I can see the first one is from Kate, Columbus. Okay, we were actually just discussing that. We tried enabling the closed captions, but for some reasons it's not showing up. We were hoping at least when we start the webinar, it would come up, but it seems like you're not able to see. That's a shame. People joining in from London, Hyderabad, Nigeria, Pune, India, different parts of the world. That's great. Cool. I think it's time and we can get started. Welcome to the May edition of Voices of Community. Today we have Tamar Shapira, hailing from Israel. She is a mompreneur, tech enthusiast, thought leader, advocate, turned into an executive CEO of SenseIT, with here today sharing about digital accessibility testing, how to get it right. With no further ado, I'll let Tamar take it up from here. But before that, it's Voice of Community. And we have, I think in the past, we have had all community leaders, thought leaders from different topics. And this is the first time ever we are having someone of the status of CEO and executive. So for a change, and Tamar, is it going to be a forward-looking accessibility talk or trends to look forward, or is it going to be more of you wearing a thought leader or an advocate hat? Tell us something about you as well as about the topic.
Absolutely. So first of all, we could speak forward thinking later on, but it's definitely thought leadership. Myself and where I come from, my approach and how I see digital accessibility and testing in general. It's part of what I do in my day job, but really the whole, my whole life and work-life balance, whatever we want to call it, is based off of my passion for accessibility in general and digital accessibility specifically. And I'll discuss why digital accessibility and what I believe. So we'll do it more from the thought leadership hat than anything else. Are we ready? I can share screen, Manoj?
Perfect, Tamar. Please go ahead. Stage is yours.
Okay. So I'll just share and then welcome everyone. We can see my screen.
Yeah,
thank
nice
you.
And good.
Thank you for asking about the closed captions. I too am trying to get it off of my side and couldn't see it. And it's definitely something that I always advocate for. I think that if we're doing digital events, we need to make sure that they're accessible from the beginning. In this case, it's a Zoom thing, and I would need to figure out how to actually implement it. So first of all, welcome. I'm really, really excited to speak because I see things from a different angle when it comes to digital accessibility and testing, and how to get it right. At this point, it can be my opinion and things that I've learned over the years. And I always turn to experts, above and beyond myself to get it right in their way. But this is definitely a topic that's a blue ocean, the way that I see it. And I think that there's many, many approaches, and the approach that we've taken until today, in my opinion, needs to change. What do I mean by needs to change? I believe that accessibility needs to be an integral part of product development. I think we need to look at digital accessibility, not just for a specific population, it was written for people with disabilities, in other words, accommodations for. And yet in 2023, we can see that everything that has to do with accessibility from, years and years and years ago through today, we're all enjoying. So if it's closed captioning and we see that millennials are now using it to watch different, shows and movies when they can't actually listen, but they're able to read it. Or if we use a ramp for strollers and to make it easier to go up to a building, not an elevator, I mean a ramp outside, then those were initially set for people in wheelchairs, and yet we're all enjoying the benefits. We're reaping the benefits up. That's kind of where I'm coming from. I know that we're taking questions in the chat. If anybody feels more comfortable speaking the questions, I'm happy to take those as well later on. And just a little bit about myself. So I am a co-founder of a startup. I am a CEO, but more importantly, I'm a social entrepreneur. And one of the biggest things that leads my why in general, and anything I do other than accessibility, has to do with for the better good. I want to leave a mark someday in this world. As a mother, I really believe that if I'm leading my children in one way, that I want to see that I'm actually making a change in this world in that, in the same direction. I love problem solving. I think it's one of my fortes of, constantly getting myself into areas where I find there are issues, but I believe everything is solvable. Sometimes it just takes a little bit more time to think of the solution. And part of that has to do with out-of-the-box thinking. So you'll see also as I speak that my approach to digital accessibility is kind of out of the box. I try to see things differently, and I try to speak of the topic and the subject area differently than what I hear out, in the communities of various communities, be it in the accessibility community or be it in the testing community or just in general in tech. Which also is part of my thought leadership. So it took me a long time to come up and say, yes, I am a thought leader because I am passionate about this space and because there's something in me that really cares and I want to speak my word. But as a lot of you might know, being a thought leader takes also a lot of confidence to come out and really state your opinion, or state your thoughts and then lead with that and then come up with different theories and methodologies and believe in what you're saying in order for others to also follow or lead together with you. So just as a word, because Manoj, you had said something about thought leadership, and that's really part of my out of the box thinking and how can I make an impact in this space? Yet I myself am not defined as a person with disabilities. And I also don't define myself as a subject matter expert in digital accessibility, but in a moment, I'll tell you where I'm coming from. I'm a runner, half K runner, which is also part of my problem solving and constantly trying to find solutions to different problems. I go by the pronouns she, her, and oftentimes you'll hear various people around me call me 𝐓𝐚𝐬 in Hebrew, meaning mom, because there's a lot of them around me. Before I jump into the agenda for today, or actually go into the different slides and what I'll be speaking about. So first of all, I will tell you my approach to digital accessibility. As I said, we'll discuss benchmarking. How good is good enough? Because I feel like I'm always asked that question, and we've come up with a way to look at how accessibility can be measured, if at all. And then we can also discuss the scene of automated testing tools, because that's something that I've been researching and developing, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, but it also has limitations to how much I advocate for only automation. And anybody in the crowd that is either an advocate or works in digital accessibility will either agree or disagree with me in writing automated testing tools, but I think we can all agree that there's some good use and we need to limit it in some way. So before I jump into it, I will tell you my personal why, because I'm passionate about what I'm doing. In 2017, so first of all, I owned a consulting firm in digital accessibility together with my today co-founder and actual husband. For over a decade, we were working with government agencies and very large corporations to ensure that not only their infrastructure, their physical infrastructure was accessible, but also their service-oriented, their customer service and the way that they worked with their own clients was accessible. And it always went according to the legal guidelines. Okay, so it's always a topic of compliance. That was actually what drove the business back then, because there was a need, there was a law, everybody had to do it, and there was always an annual kind of audit or consulting that was necessary. A nice business, and then we started looking into the digital world, understanding that there's much more opportunity there, both for business, but more so for impact, because in the digital world, you can actually fix or build with accessibility much easier than you can in the physical world. Of course, an old building that doesn't have an elevator takes a lot to install that elevator. And today we see that buildings are not built without an elevator, right? It's not up to code. So we were handling things like, buildings from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that didn't have a ramp, or that didn't have a handle, or things that, you'd have to implement. And it always took a lot of, the accommodations always took a lot of approvals from within and bureaucracy. And then, it was always the money issue and high priority. What is the highest priority? What is the lowest priority? And it just felt like it wasn't authentic for what we believed in. And yet the digital world brought on this opportunity that actually you can design something to be accessible. And if our developers only knew how to implement that, and then of course, test that implementation is working well and constantly test it or check up on it, then digital products can be accessible. I was naive back then, thinking that this is really, it's a breakthrough and everyone's going to be able to do it. And of course, 6 years later, I understand the pushback and the difficulties and the challenges of companies adapting and adopting the approach or the mindset to ensuring that all their products are accessible. And yet, I still believe that this is something that can be done and will be done. Oh, I see that the closed captioning is enabled. Thank you for whoever did that. So I started my journey in researching what does it mean to create a product that's accessible? What is digital accessibility? Even how are companies doing it back then? And what were we doing with our own clients? And we were doing everything manually. And then we also found that all of the audits that we had different subject matter experts working under us, and the audits all came out different. I mean, they were similar, but everyone had, we took 5 different audits or 5 people to audit, and then we saw that things came up very differently from one audit to the next. Not necessarily for the same client, but there wasn't anything that was that was, template or consistent. We'll call it consistent because it's not really a template, which makes sense because accessibility, a lot of it has to do with interpretation, but we didn't feel like this was something that was conducive to the future of technology. The future of technology, even back then in 2016 and the end of 16, beginning of 17, we were looking at this space was moving towards the cloud and agile development and faster developments and doing testing for things like performance, and security became it was always something that was very high up there after 2010 or so, when we just started in our own entrepreneurship journey. And I always looked at it as accessibility is going to get there. And I thought that it would get there faster than it is. Here, I'm still here 6 years later, and I'll still be here in 6 years' time. But then in 2017, something just triggered. A very, very close friend of ours who I grew up with had an accident. He's quadriplegic today. He's a PhD candidate and he's studying. But that initial shock that life just changed, but then what does that mean that life changed? Does everything have to change? Or is everything for him already, different? And are there things that can help out, that can stay the same, that can be part of what he's doing? And that's when I put my finger on technology and really, really tried to feel the digital accessibility. So my why is my close friend Jay, who is living today in a wheelchair. He's wheelchair bound, and the more technology advances, the more he has access to technologies independently, the more he thrives. And I've seen that over the years. So I won't stop this, right? Because on the one hand, you have business. On the other hand, impact is so much greater. And when you really have that passion that comes from within and a reason to go for it, we continue. So that's my story, a little bit long, but I think that also brings out that thought leadership and the care for what I do. So just a little bit more to jump into these, this whole space of accessibility and what it means. This is where I take my approach from, okay? I'm going to show you 3 slides with 3 different pictures. In this picture, we see what we define as equality. 3 people are overlooking a baseball game. There's a fence, and we can see that they're all given the same solution to view the game. But there's one person that can't see it. The person is short, be it a child or be it somebody who's not as tall, which means that the solution to bring equality to all is actually not really working here. So in the next slide, if I can move it. Oh, and not always, hold on, there we go. In this slide, we see equity, which is one of our goals, to make sure that everybody's getting their own, the solution that fits best for them. And then we're not bringing equal access, we're creating something of equity. Oh, there it's jumping, jumped too soon. And this is wonderful. And this was an approach that we were all, working to get to. And yet, my belief is in removing the systematic barriers, because if we just didn't have that fence or the gate there, the fence that you can see through, but put a fence where you can see through, you don't need a solution for everybody can see it in their own perspective. And this is what I believe digital accessibility is all about. We don't need to add accommodations. We need to make sure that the digital products we're building and are constantly tested for don't have these barriers. They're actually an integral part of the product itself. So we'll go into this, but we have keyboard users, we have assistive technology, and we have, the easier accommodations would be enabling larger fonts and the type of fonts. But today we're going to focus on what I feel we don't usually speak about, because we usually speak about the low-hanging fruit, and I want to speak about the interactive elements, the functionality of our product, and how those can be something of access to all. So when I look at accessibility, and this is also within the literature and a lot of research, accessibility is usability for people with disabilities. And not only for people with disabilities, okay? We're all reaping the benefits of having a product that's accessible. It's more simple to use. It's more user-friendly. The user experience is much more conducive to everybody than just the functional usability. Oh, this is skipping. It does this sometimes. Sorry. And if we look at the W3C, the way that usability is defined, it defines it as the extent to which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specified goals effectively, efficiently, and with satisfaction in a specified context of use. I'm going to break this down for us in accessibility. If we look at specified users, it includes people with a range of disabilities, right? There's not just one definition of what a user is, even though from my experience, the tech companies like to build for mainstream. I don't even know what mainstream is anymore. And the specified context of use, in this case, when we're speaking about a specific group of people, would include accessibility considerations, like assistive technologies. But it doesn't have to be, apologies, it's just going to keep jumping. We don't have to make accommodations specifically for assistive technologies per use case. We need to make sure that assistive technologies can work in general. And we'll talk about that also. If anybody has any questions, please, add that in if I'm not being if I'm not being specific enough for you. But in the case of looking at users with disabilities who use assistive technologies, one of which would be to ensure that the keyboard is working. And the keyboard in this case would be our assistive technology. Okay, the mouse is something that we're used to clicking buttons, but if you were enabling a button to be clicked with the keyboard in the appropriate manner, we'll get into that in a moment, then you don't really need to know whether or not your user is a keyboard user and why they're a keyboard user, if they're a mouse user, if they use assistive technologies and whatnot. So that's just a little bit more general. I don't know how many have heard or haven't heard of 𝐓𝐶AG, okay, which has today's version that we're working with is 2.1, in hopes that 2.2 will come in, and we're already seeing the future of 3.0. But right now I'm going to concentrate on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, known as 𝐓𝐶AG or WCAG. And when somebody speaks of compliance, or what I like to say conformance, because it's not really compliance, you need to conform to these guidelines. I think it's important to understand how they're broken down. You can find the breakdown in a really cool image on Intopia. Manoj, I can give you the URL for this, and we can also put it in the chat afterwards. Again, this is, I don't know why this does it. So that everybody can have access to it. I think it breaks down the way that the WCAG is written in a very user-friendly manner. So just so that we can see here, you see the circle around the yellow WCAG over here. We have 4 different words: perceivable, operable, robust, understandable. Here I'm breaking it down for us. So those four are principles that the WCAG is written. The principles are broken down eventually into success criteria. There's 4 different principles that we're abiding by, but we generally speak of this at the conformance level. So someone will say, oh, I need to be compliant with, okay, I'll use the general word used. I need to be compliant with 𝐓𝐶AG level AA. Okay. So when you look at the actual mapping that Intopia does, you'll see that the principles are broken down actually into levels, A, AA, AAA. And then under each conformance level, you have the success criteria of which the entire 𝐓𝐶AG is composed of. Okay, there are 78 success criteria, and they're broken down into the different levels just for right now, for our purposes, so that we can see what it means. Because I'm often asked, well, how much coverage can we get from X tool or from, a manual testing? And the coverage that we need to care for most at this point when we say AA is that you're conforming to A, which is the most critical criteria. Or I'll flip it and I'll say, if you're not conforming to level A, then you have critical barriers that are stopping a person from using the product. And AA includes A and the AA conformance levels, which there could be arguments about this, but we call them serious. So if AA success criteria are there's violation of, or there are issues with, those are more serious issues generally. There are some critical issues, and I'm using the words critical and serious. You'll also see me using moderate because later on we'll talk about benchmarking. But this is really the way that the 𝐓𝐶AG is broken down, and how we test for accessibility is in accordance to the success criteria. It doesn't mean that you're going to have a checklist, 1, 2, 3, 4 through 78, and you've done, for number 1, you've tested number 1, tested number 2. No, every one of these success criteria may be weighted differently. Just part of the reason that it's so difficult to come out and say, oh, I've covered, 75% of. Again, I want to show you in the benchmarking, because what I believe is that we have to separate between critical barriers and serious and moderate, or anything less than that when it comes to issues that we find within a product. I hope until now it's understood. And now we go really into the methodology, or the approach that we've come up with for benchmarking, or when we answer the question, how good is good enough? So we like to say that good enough is doing it all. Doing it all doesn't mean getting to 100% accessibility in your product. Doing it all means covering everything that's going to be critical for a user. So there are no barriers for a user to actually use the product. If the user journey that you're testing is critical within your product, that there are no serious barriers, because that's causing serious issues for the user experience. And then we also have a way of discussing how to test for, legacy products and builds that were releases, past releases. Here I'm kind of looking into the today and tomorrow. And if you have the opportunity to go back into your legacy products or into past releases, then, you know, of course we advocate for it. But like there's a wonderful advocate and thought leader, Meryl Evans, who says progress, not perfection, or she actually likes to use it. I don't know if it's actually her quote. And we always like to say about accessibility that it's progress and not perfection. So we try to get clients or, you know, anybody that I speak to, who I try to engage in digital accessibility, to understand that in order to get to where you want to get to, which is an accessible product, because most people want it, then you need to start progress and not just think that, okay, this is a whole project I have to take on and it's too much. And no, just start small steps. So in the question, how good is good enough, I've split this into 3 different items that we look at, okay? First of all, the user impact. Second of all, which means it's, of course, 100%, like I said, can't be achieved. So our strategic way of looking at it is kind of like Pareto, okay? You're 80-20. How much is your user impacted by either the barrier or the issue that we found or not? And that's when we break it down into severity level, okay? And the critical user journey. So severity level is, like we said, is going to be based off of the success criteria or the conformance levels, as we saw before, A and AA, and your user journeys. So if you're testing your critical user journey, okay, within your product, you want those to be accessible. You don't want any critical issues where you can't, if you can click a button, or we'll go into an example afterwards, if I have a scroll down menu and you can, you know, open the menu and then click on the item in the menu and you can actually execute a function there, you want to be sure that you could do that with a keyboard, that a screen reader, for example, can pick up on your actions as well. And anything that are issues found in that specific element or in that component is going to be 0. There's not going to be any issues there, not critical and not serious. I hope I explained it, you know, more or less okay. If not, I've drawn a chart here just to kind of visualize what I'm trying to say here in terms of you don't want any critical issues, where we kind of let go and allow some slips for serious issues, depending on the user flows, and of course, content as well. And moderate or minor is something that we usually discuss on a case-by-case basis, depending on what type of flow it is and what type of moderate issue is being found. But I always like to tell, you know, product managers or product teams that I speak to, that the critical and serious issues that you're finding, those are the ones that you want to look at the most. And then we kind of break it down to how they're testing and what user flows are testing. Okay, I always like questions because I want to make sure that it's understood by the other side, but we'll continue. And I'll take a beautiful example of keyboard functionality. I find that it's the easiest interaction to explain when it comes to our products, aside from the average, you know, the average discussion about font size, colors, alt text, and the whatnot. I want to dive deeper into what I find is not something that most, at least from my experience, most product teams think about. And they think it's a given that, okay, oh, keyboard functionality, it's just a tab, 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 tab. So I like this picture because it always represents how simple the product needs to be coded in order for accessibility to work, per se. Accessibility, it means simplicity in my eyes, and jumps all the time. Okay. So here I like that it just portrays that even, you know, the youngest of children can press the keyboard and they can interact with the product. I'm going to take us into a real live example of what I said before about the menu items. And now what I'd like to show here is not only the fact that keyboard functionality is one of those things that we measure and it's critical specifically in this process of signing into an e-commerce product, or, you know, in this case, it's a website as we know it. But I also want to introduce very, very high level, introduce you to the accessibility design patterns, because I see that I don't tend to hear about that very often, maybe because it's very specific, but I know to tell you that a lot of the approaches and a lot of the methodologies that we've come up with, how to work with clients and explaining what can be done, what can be implemented from early on and then tested for, are actually, it's out there, it's public, you can read about it, it's, you know, it's very detailed and there's a lot of fine lines. Not everybody really wants to read it and understand it, but it's out there. So here I like to take the menu item, okay? And over here, the keyboard functionality comes in the form of, first of all, you have to get to the sign in button, right? And you have to press the right key in order to open up the menu item. And then in order to browse through or to scroll through the menu itself, you need to use different keys that are available in our keyboard. It's not only tabs. So you might have your arrow keys, you might have your enter key, you might have your space key. Everything can be found in the APG, the accessibility design patterns that are published by the W3C. It can be found on their website, and it breaks down every type of component like menu, okay, or charts, and explains how they need to be designed for accessibility. What is the explanation essentially? We're looking for the expected behavior. What is the expected behavior of a user that's using the keyboard only and or assistive technology in order to browse and to interact with that specific website back here, right? So what is the expected outcome of the keyboard when we scroll down this menu? All can be found in the APG, and I really, really encourage anyone who's representing a company or an organization that's developing products to check in with the UX team if they even know of these design patterns, because it might just help the whole development process to be sure that it's designed with accessibility, and then it's developed with the accessibility criteria, and then it's tested for. And then you create this cycle that is early on, or what later on you'll see what I think that we can shift accessibility to the left. So in this case, again, like I said, the menu button or the menu or menu bar, you're going to have specific definitions of what this means. And then once you go into each one of these components, there's, you know, it's a long scroll down page of the expected behavior, how to actually design for it, how to implement it, what is expected, and so on and so forth. Manoj, over here, I'm basically done with my own presentation, and now I'm kind of going into the lay of the land in the future. So I don't know if you want to say something or discuss or questions, unless you want me to continue.
Sure. I think it's going well, and we do have a couple of questions. We can take it now if you would like to, or we can do it at the end of the session.
We can definitely do it at the end, if that's okay. If it's, you know,
sure,
neither here nor there, I can go ahead and just jump into why I believe, thank you, why I believe that the whole idea of shift left is also is relevant for digital accessibility and how it can be done, and why I believe that it is being implemented, but we can also make it more efficient and make a change for the way that it's being implemented. So in this slide, I show a very high level overview of the development cycle and where accessibility is sitting today, accessibility testing, if at all. Okay, and when I say if at all, it makes me sad to say it, but the honest truth is that not all companies are even taking care of or thinking about their accessibility unless they need it. And the need for it comes from either selling into an enterprise that is requiring it for procurement, or a complaint, unfortunately. And I want to just be very specific that when I say digital product and testing, I'm talking about SaaS products, I'm talking about software systems. I'm not talking about the you know, small business website that may or may not test for accessibility like I believe they should. For the small business website, I believe that the platforms they're building their websites on, those need to be those need to implement and integrate the accessibility testing and design patterns early on. So I'm going into more SaaS and software that I'm assuming most are representing here. So if we do go to the best case scenario in most companies, it's that manual testing is being done for accessibility post-release. And that's generally just to check the box that they've done the accessibility and that they know of the issues and will get to it. Or we're doing it and there's a real urgency right now because we need it for procurement. So we're waiting for the manual testing to be completed. We're bringing back the product post-release to debug it for accessibility. And then this is where I saw that it becomes a hamster wheel because it never ends. Because essentially we're dependent on manual tester to test for accessibility. How about if we brought it in a little bit, more left, a little bit early on in the design, of course, as I mentioned before, but where it's missing is here in automatic testing. So we have some tools that are able to scan our HTML and they can find what we call the low-hanging fruit. But those tools are not interacting with the product, which is why you need manual testing, essentially. Some companies are bringing manual testing into the cycle. Okay, there's manual testers that sit with Scrum teams, and we're trying to test as fast as possible, as manual as we can do it, while the product is in development. But my goal and the way that I see it, and what I believe is a true disruption, is how can we introduce an automated testing that does the interaction like a manual tester, not letting go of the idea or the need for manual testing, because you always need it in testing in general. You're always going to need users to test your product. But how can we ensure that the release of our product is as accessible as possible, making sure that we're covering the critical issues or the critical barriers. The critical barriers have to do with interacting with the product. So, without giving more of my belief in where I'm taking this and everything in my research, I do see that the accessibility testing needs to be automated, not to find more issues, but that's my timer, but to find the issues that are critical for use and that know how to interact with our product, like functional testing in general. And I'll leave you with what I said in the beginning, which is accessibility is usability for people with disabilities, not only and more, but that really is the approach that, if you could take one thing from here, is remember that when you're testing for usability in your product, don't forget that there's also something within usability called accessibility. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tamar. It was wonderful and a lot of new stuff that I learned personally, because I'm used to be someone who talk about accessibility at quite a few conferences. So this is definitely a different approach, and thank you for sharing the thought leader aspects that you had about accessibility. And we do have certain questions, but before that, I was personally interested in understanding about the ADP that you talked about. As you rightly said, not many people speak about it, even me including. I often say about the usage of ARIA being, judicious, not just used as a, patches for making it more accessible. But I think the ADP is something very interesting. Could you please touch upon more on?
Yeah, of course. So ARIA, as we generally know it, is the ARIA labels, and those are always used. We like to say they're used and abused. So people attack on ARIA labels in areas that you don't need to, and it's almost like putting the wrong syllable on the right emphasis. That whole thing, the emphasis in the syllable. So ARIA labels are great, but it's not only that. ARIA came up. It's a whole. It's not a method. I mean, it's a school of thought. I don't even know how to define ARIA. When ARIA was written, it's meant to allow us to develop specifically for accessibility. It's not the shortcut method, but alongside what we know as the labels, there's an entire design pattern that fits the accessibility ARIA, because it's slipping my mind now, the
Mhm.
term. But when you go in, and I could go in and I can actually show you, because of course I've sat with my subject matter experts and really wanted to understand where this comes from, because it boggles my mind that if it's all out there, why aren't people actually going into it? So W3C has the accessibility design pattern section. When you go into the website, you can see that it's split into components. Okay, we have charts, we have menu items. Thank you, Keith. Accessible rich internet applications. And I even have in mind one of the authors of, thank you. So when you actually go in and then you could see all the different components that we speak of, and you go into the components, it actually outlines the way, the expected behavior, and how to design for it. And it really goes into details, even technical details, what you need to do for each type of component. If you have that in your component library, you've designed with these design patterns, and you test on an ongoing basis, from my perspective, you're good to go. You're on your path to building with accessibility, and you keep doing it, and you keep doing it because you have that base. So I hope that answers the question. I'll send the link also. Maybe I can send it in the chat here. But
Sure,
I can do
that'll
2
be
things at a
helpful.
time.
Cool. All right, let's pick up a few questions from the Q&A. First question that we have from anonymous attendee is, how often should we be performing accessibility audits on our digital platforms?
Okay, so you're talking to an advocate, and you're talking to somebody who really believes that this is something that should be continuous. I like to coin the term continuous accessibility, because you should be doing this at every release. I would say that depending on your, the priority level within your organization, and how significant an accessibility program is that you may have where you're building, then you can also do it at every testing cycle. But really, I would, at regression testing at the most, at the least. But sorry, at the most. But at the least, I would say every single release, you have your accessibility testing going on. It's not an annual audit. Your audits would be much more simple annual, when you're writing up your annual reports, let's say. And I can discuss that also, what my opinion is on the VPAT, the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, or your ACR, your Accessibility Conformance Report. When you're writing those up, if you're releasing products and you've tested accessibility at every release, then those audits are going to be much more simple to write, because you have all your data. You don't have to retest, ongoing and ongoing.
Cool. I hope that answered the question, whoever asked it. Next question from Kate Newton. Question regarding the severity. Are you measuring severity by the impact to the business or the impact to the user? I think this is the slide from the one that you showed.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they work hand in hand, right? If your impact to the user is negative or positive, that's going to impact the business as well. A better user experience is going to keep your clients in your site or in your product, which is going to impact your business positively. In terms of metrics and what it can do, it's not something that I've measured and I've researched. It's something that I have in my own pipeline to do so. But there's a definitive correlation between your user impact and your business impact. So a positive correlation.
I hope that answered the question, Kate. All right, again, there's another question from Kate. Is your primary offering accessibility testing or accessibility consultation, practices, process, governance? I think this is regarding SenseIT, if I'm not wrong.
My personal, I'm happy to talk about it offline, but it's product based only. We're not into consulting, but we work with partners who are able to do more consultations. With that being said, I completely believe in support. So we have a whole network of our own subject matter experts, because you always need to have the support and guidance when it comes to interpretation. So it's not just set it and forget it, but we like to enable and support the efforts of a company that are trying to test their accessibility ongoing. So we're product-based company only, but you can't forego the fact that we need to, add in that guidance.
Cool, thank you. Let me pick a different person. Question from Urvi Rabadia. do you have any template for accessibility testing to make sure accessibility testing is performed? I think it's a very broad answer. Sure.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, the benchmark. A template would be very, it would be use case based. You do have a general template. You can look at the VPAT template to see what a VPAT would be looking for. And really a template is your WCAG. You need to conform to all of those. And then how to break it down into what type of tests per success criteria. That's where it becomes a little bit more intricate and where people get a little bit lost and turn to professionals. But you can read up on, what the voluntary product accessibility template is requiring, because that's going hand in hand with the WCAG success criteria. But if you mean the benchmarking, then that's something I can break down a little bit more in detail one-on-one, where you can look at your critical user journeys. What are the critical criteria, and what are the tests for that, just to understand.
I hope people can connect with you on LinkedIn for such questions, Tamar.
Absolutely, of course. Awesome. I love talking accessibility, clearly.
Oh, there's another question from Shoaib Malik. Limitations of accessibility testing using different tools.
Sorry, say that again, Manoj.
I think if I have to rephrase a bit, I think question from Shoaib is all about with different tools available in the market for accessibility testing. What do you see them or from a limitation perspective? Are they limited? Do they do enough justice?
Right. Okay, so this is without being very biased and trying to be not very subjective. We have hundreds of tools on the market. And I would say that all are working in the same direction of scanning HTML. That's the limitations that we have today. We don't have products yet that know to interact from the front end, which is what we need as manual testers. We need to see, because we do testing with eyes and visual, but we also need to listen to the recording of a screen reader, use our keyboard, and make sure that everything works. It's part of my own research, but that's the limitation, is that we can only test what the HTML, if then, and that's not what accessibility is all about. That's giving you maybe about 20, I'll shoot it up there, maybe 30% of what you actually need to do. It's about 18 really. Yes, you do need to, you do need to test content. Content is much, much easier. That's the low hanging fruit. Video, definitely. Images is going to be your alt text. But the actual content is more simple. When I speak about the interactions and the functions, that's going to be the more challenging part, unless you actually know how to test for it, which is my hope. My hope is that knowledge can be transferred into product teams. And there's always going to be that one, person that waves the accessibility flag and knows how to test for functionality, or that we have tools, that are like performance testing and security, that we know how to run through them. We trust them enough. Then we can continue with our user test basing later on. Just saw that pop up. So.
Cool. Makes sense. Cool. There's a question from Sparsh. What's your perspective on the future of accessibility laws and regulations? How can businesses best prepare for potential changes? There's also another question that I would like to combine. And how important is this issue to address? Do you have any examples of companies that got into trouble for not implementing accessibilities?
Of course. That's on the internet. You can find it. I don't think that right now the laws are strong enough, or maybe it's not that the laws are not strong enough, but the enforcement is not strong enough to come out and say, that's why you have to do it. We fear legal actions because that's what we've learned to do. But really, if we look deep down, we're disabling people from using what we're looking towards, the future of the digital commerce. You want your product to be used by anybody. The more you open it up to, other than the mainstream user, the more potential you have. I do believe that the enforcement will get stronger. We see that it's going across the board. The US already has, laws and enforcement for public, for federal government organizations and for federally funded organizations. And the largest of enterprises, and I can give examples of, are already implementing accessibility programs, whether they had a small lawsuit, small complaints, several complaints. It's a maturity level. So the more mature the company is when it comes to accessibility accommodations, the more their digital accessibility is also is up to par. I mean, they have programs implemented. In terms of the large names, so Domino's is going to be the one that the accessibility community spoke of in the last few years, because that was a very, very, very large lawsuit, and it was a big deal because it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court didn't accept the case. It wasn't willing to take on the case. You have Winn-Dixie out in Florida that was sued. You have Target way back when, I believe it was in 2010 or 14, Target was sued for. And then you also have smaller lawsuits, on companies that are just the Target was 2005. Thank you, Keith. We could do this together next time. Target was really long ago. So they're out there. There's also smaller lawsuits. Again, we're looking for why to sue. And I don't believe that that's really the reason why we need to make it happen. We need to make it happen because it's just going to bring on more users. Eventually we'll know that. But if right now all you need to do is do it for conformance, don't do it after the fact, do it before, because you're just wasting your developers' time and your company's money. That's the reality. Debugging, like we all know, costs much more than developing for.
Cool. Okay. Any suggestions for screen reader testing tool other than JAWS from Farhan Khan?
Yes, I mean, so JAWS is going to be the one that we know it because it's what's used most often, but you have NVDA, which is a free screen reader. JAWS is just a better quality, which is why it's often used. There are tools that are using NVDA. Some are still in development in order to log what you can hear so that it can go automatically. Again, technology is not up to par yet of where we'd like it to be for accessibility. The minute that it gets there, alongside the need and the want, then we're going to be, we'll have much more tools out there. But there are some, and I can also write to you separately, Manoj, where, anybody can look into the testing that can be used with screen readers. I know that there's companies that allow you to kind of have a membership to their own screen readers, and then you can run it through your product. But NVDA, you can look up.
Awesome. Couple of questions coming up as we interact. It's a question from Shoaib again. Country-wise, different disability act is there. So how do we overcome this type of challenge while doing accessibility testing?
The WCAG is universal. It's global. The laws per country are taken from the WCAG, and the laws are going to emphasize more or less, of specific success criteria. When you abide by and conform to WCAG, then you'll be good to go, and then specifically see what your law requires, whether it's a statement or whether it's, a designated person within the company who is the contact person for accessibility. The laws will be broken down, but WCAG is going to be your guiding practice.
Very true. So the question from Kate Newton again. What is the process tool set that you're planning to implement when making automated testing more like manual testing, like rule sets, tools for automation, learning models using AI?
Okay, so what we've been working on is a simulator. We've taken certain success criteria from level A and created a simulator to simulate the behavior of person with disabilities, because it will go across the board. And it's not AI based, it's everything algorithms that we've built, created, and worked with ourselves as manual testers. And it includes all the different rules, so I can go into more detail, but it is a simulator and it can integrate into development cycle by leveraging what is already being used, existing script. So you don't have to do a lot for accessibility, but it's always a work in progress, even what we're doing. Make sure that that simulation is not going to be seen as, okay, that's my user and that's it. Rather, there's a lot of teaching behavior here or mindset.
Cool. If anyone wants to see in action, please reach out to Tamar for demos. They have some awesome simulation and algorithms behind the scenes to simulate it. With that, moving on to the next question. What does LambdaTest offer in this area from Iran, Yano? Well, LambdaTest is a next generation mobile apps and cross-browser testing cloud. We help to make sure we provide a unified digital experience for your digital apps, where you have various combinations of browsers, devices, mobile devices at scale. You can use any of them to test it. When specific to accessibility, we are coming up with new features. I think the one that we already have, which some of our customers use, is on the screen reader testing. So imagine you're using Windows-based laptop or a Mac-based MacBook. Beyond that, if you want to do, say, for example, on Windows 10 or say M2 Mac, or different older versions or new versions or, iPhones, and you want to check for screen reading capability on that, we help you provide that at scale. So that's what we do at LambdaTest. And thanks for the link, Sparsh. You can check that link for more about what specifically we are doing in the accessibility space. Cool. And few more questions. What types of training or resources can we provide to help teams better understand and implement digital accessibility?
There's a lot of content out there. 𝐓𝐚𝐽, which is one of the older of consulting firms and also infamous for their work with enterprises, has 𝐓𝐚𝐽 University. So you can also learn a lot of accessibility methodologies, but also practical skills from there. I always revert to the W3C. That's where it all comes from. Everything else is interpretation. So go directly to W3C, and then you can also find that advocate or the person who's passionate about to give a little bit more information. I believe knowledge needs to be shared, and you can have it. It's just intricate. It's really to understand. And if you're not a user with disabilities, then you become a super user who can really understand and empathize what a user is doing and then relate to. But all the materials are out online. Takes a lot of reading and understanding, and people like us who want to give out the knowledge, and you can contact us also if there's any questions. So that's something that I always say. You'll always find somebody who's passionate about digital accessibility, really, and advocates for, and they'll be happy to give more detailed explanation to what you've read.
So a slightly different answer, if I'm allowed to share, Tamar. There's a group called accessibilityassociation.org, I think the IAAP. It's a group that formed, I think, a couple of years back, and they do have membership and certification options if you're interested to learn, or if you want to enable your team members. And I think this is one space where you could learn truly about accessibility.
As well, and wonderful people that stand behind.
Absolutely. Okay, question from Lalita. As there are different tools available for accessibility testing, do you recommend any specific tool to test for compliance?
So again, like I said before, I don't like to speak of compliance, and it's more of conformance, and there are so many tools out there. And because I'm also representing a tool, I don't think it's fair enough to come out and say, what is and what isn't. But the leading tools that you'll find out there right now that are being implemented in the largest of organizations are going to belong to 𝐓𝐚𝐽, which is ACTS. It's available. It's out there. You can look it up. Like I said, NVDA as a screen reader to start understanding what that means. It's not a testing tool, but it is an assistive technology that you use also within your testing. You could do that. Level Access has a lot of content and information, also has their own scanner. I can go on and on. There's a company called TPGI that you can look up, and what their tools are. But those, I'm not coming out to recommend anything, because I'm a strong believer and advocate that you need to do a holistic approach to your testing. And nothing's going to give you just that, check just set it and forget it. Sorry.
It's challenging. It's a challenging question. Wonderfully answered.
Very challenging.
Thanks,
question.
Tamar.
Sure.
Yeah, trying to put you on the spot and
Right.
see how it goes. But you did well. Thank you so much. Well, we're almost at the time, and time flies. I mean, we already answered more than 13 questions, 14 questions. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And any last few words about accessibility or, kind of advice for people getting started, Tamar?
I think I left the mark that I like to leave is accessibility is usability, so that you can start thinking about it, not as just that stepbrother of testing or development, but as an integral part of your product. And I'm available. I'm online all the time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, and good luck. I really think that it's going to become what we know of as performance testing today in security. The more you learn, the more you do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thanks, Tamar. I'll see you in the next month with a different set of topic and different set of speakers for Voices of Community. Until then, take care and see you next time.